Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. And welcome to the February 25 edition of our One Health Global Health Institute Tuesday webinar series. Thank you all for joining us. And my name is Jorge Osorio. I'm the director of the Global Health Institute, and I have the pleasure of presenting today's webinar, which addresses the importance of women in science. At GHI, we are conveners who believe addressing global health challenges begins with investing in community-level conversations. We foster collaborative One Health focused discussions that connect human, animals, and plant health to transform global health perspectives through multidisciplinary and multisectoral approaches. Our work is focused on the Wisconsin idea, which basically takes the knowledge and research out of the classroom into real-world settings. Our Global Health webinar series features researchers and practitioners from the University of Wisconsin and also from around the world to highlight and examine the complexity of global health challenges and the many kinds of expertise that are needed to address them. As a leader, as a mentor, father, and a partner, it's also my honor to be part of the discussion for today's webinar. That is the showcase of 3 talented and dedicated researchers, practitioners, innovators, and women who will share their experiences working in science-based positions, highlighting the opportunities and challenges, as well as the importance of continued collaboration to expand perspectives, community health solutions, and ensure women's voices are the norm in science. We thank all of you for your leadership and hard work. Before we jump in, there's a couple of quick housekeeping items. Number one, we are recording today's sessions, and they will be archived videos will be available at our website at ghi.wisc.edu. And second, we are monitoring the chat, so please share your questions and comments for the panelists there. So we have a great panel today, and let's get started. Today, we begin by welcoming our moderator, Dr. Kristin Lund. Kristin is an associate professor of surgery at the University of Wisconsin with clinical practice in endocrine surgery. She completed her medical degree at Texas Tech University, her general surgery training at the University of Kentucky, and her subspecialty fellowship training at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. After joining the faculty at UW, she completed her master's in public health at the University of Wisconsin Medical School and Public Health. She is passionate about global surgery, having worked on the ground in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Palestine, improving access to surgical care and education over the past decade. She's also a fellow at the College of Surgeons of Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa, served as a board examiner for the College of Surgeons and East, Central, and Southern Africa, and chairs the Global Affairs Committee of the American Association of Endocrine Surgeons. I'm also proud to say that Kristin is a member of GHI's advisory committee. Welcome, and thank you for joining us, Kristin.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope everybody can hear me okay, and I'm going to go ahead and share some slides here. I am going to start just briefly. I think each of us that are panelists on today's session are going to give kind of a short 10-minute background, 10 to 15 minutes of what our work is and what we do. And then we'll open up the discussion so people can ask questions. We can chat amongst ourselves. So please feel free, as Jorge said, to put anything in the chat, and we'll try to moderate that behind the scenes. But thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm thrilled to be here and talk just briefly about my work in global surgery, sort of what that involves, and the very, many different aspects of care, clinical education, research type work that I'm able to be involved in. So I'm going to use a couple of different organizations as reference, and I kind of wear several different hats in the work that I've been fortunate enough to be doing. The first being obviously with the Department of Surgery here at Wisconsin. I've been on the faculty here now for 9 years. This was my first job out of training. And I'm very, very lucky to have a job that I love and get to do incredible clinical work here. The majority of my clinical practice is thyroid and parathyroid surgery. And so when I'm here in the country, which is most of the time, I spend a lot of time operating on things like thyroid cancer or primary hyperparathyroidism. When I'm not here, I'm doing several other different things, one of which is working with the Department of Surgery's collaboration with Hawassa University, which is in Ethiopia. This is one of the model hubs that we'll talk about from the American College of Surgeons, which really is kind of a pioneering effort to bring multiple institutions together and collaborate. I'm going to talk a little bit about work that I do within the Association of Academic Global Surgery, which is a collection of surgeons and other healthcare providers, everything from medical students to biomedical engineers to pharmacy to anesthesia, to ethicists, working together to sort of define this as an academic pathway, which for many, many years it was not well recognized. And I'm proud to say that I think we've made great strides in showing the importance of this work and the collaboration that it really takes to bring something like surgical care across the world. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit as well about my involvement with the College of Surgeons of Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa, which has been a really great opportunity for me for professional growth and learning how to be a better educator and how to help grow programs very systematically. So I think anyone who's worked in this arena, especially in the surgical capacity, knows that one of the biggest challenges we have is global surgery tends to function in silos. Everyone sort of has their project and their partnership, but we don't do a great job of connecting kind of across the breadth of the work that's being done. There's many really incredible non-governmental organizations that do good work. There's a lot of US academic institutions that have individual partnerships. There are surgical societies that have started to dip their toe in the world of global surgery and try to collaborate with partners in ultra low resource settings. And then there's others as well. But as I've done more and more of this work over the years, I've started to realize there's not just silos in terms of the institutions and the bodies doing this work, but also really in the types of work that are being done. There's a million different opportunities for involvement, and they don't always sort of cross-pollinate the way I think that we could have them do to optimize what we're doing. So there's people that work in research simply, whether it's in a lab or a collaboration, a partnership with another institution, answering specific questions in various areas of science. There's a lot of work done in education, whether that's medical students, surgical resident education, or even ongoing faculty education and building skills. That sometimes translates into a little bit of clinical care, which of course is taking care of patients, which for many of us is our primary love of this job. And then as we work to improve surgical quality, there's a lot of a role now for things like credentialing and examinations, which is something that's really building up, at least in my work across the continent of Africa. So we're going to kind of touch on all of those things. I mentioned the surgical training hubs, and this is really a pioneering effort that I have to give credit to my primary mentor in global surgery, which is Dr. Gurma Tefera, who has worked with the American College of Surgeons to have them help support multiple different institutions here in the United States, collaborating with a single site in a low resource setting. And that first pilot site, as we mentioned, was Hawassa, Ethiopia. So up to 12 universities listed here have all committed and had the support of their departments develop partnerships in all of the pillars really of what we're working on. So research, education, clinical, and quality. And I was fortunate enough to be there on the ground just a couple of weeks ago now. It seems like it was forever ago, but in January, the first week of January, we were able to do the first ever resident research day. And for residents training in these programs now, clinical research to some extent is a part of their graduation requirements. So this was our fourth year residents presenting their thesis and doing it actually in the setting of somewhat of a competition. We were able to give a financial incentive to the residents, and the best presentation won $100, which was really great to see the support from both the college, the university itself, and the School of Public Health. And to put things in perspective, $100 can be the equivalent of a month's salary. So we were really, really excited to be able to support this. And we followed that resident research day with a 2-day research course for the upcoming second and third year residents who realized after watching their colleagues present and get grilled with questions what they would be facing in the coming years. And so that brought a lot of enthusiasm for the research course. So we were thrilled to do that. We've done several different research courses across the continent, one being partnering with the Association of Academic Surgery to bring fundamentals of surgical research courses to their college, to their major annual meetings. And when we were first given this mandate back in 2019, the plan was that the Association of Academic Surgery here in the US would help us and support financially for 5 years, but our mandate was that within 5 years, the course had to be completely self-sustaining by the College of Surgeons of Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa. And I'm really thrilled to say that even in the setting of COVID and having to pivot to virtual work, we were able to make that happen. So we brought a lot of training, and that's been up to 75 to 100 attendees every time we've done that session. And this was one of the earlier ones in 2019 in Kampala, Uganda. As I alluded to, COVID made us pivot quite a bit in terms of things we were doing surgically, one being virtual examinations. And for an organization like COSEXA, which is 14 member countries across the continent of Africa, to pivot and be able to examine 100 plus candidates in multiple different countries at exactly the same time, which for me, I don't know if you can see on this computer screenshot, the exams were going on at 5 in the morning for us, but that was mid-afternoon in Zimbabwe and in Kenya where our candidate was. So it took a tremendous amount of collaboration and work to get these validated exams up and running in a virtual format. And they've since been able to continue that, which has helped with some of the burden of travel for a lot of our colleagues and our trainees, and been able to prove that we can do this in a standardized fashion. I'm really lucky to spend a lot of time working in medical student education. The students obviously are the future of healthcare in this region. And just got back from the first 2 weeks of February working in Rwanda at the University of Global Health Equity, teaching students in simulation models, which you can see on the left, and then hands-on work at one of their level 2 teaching hospitals in Kibogora, Rwanda. So that was a tremendous opportunity. And again, I'm very grateful for that. One of the things that we've really worked to try to do is optimize what sort of things can be done in a virtual setting and what really requires like a visiting presence on the ground. You know, conferences, 8-hour conferences, long sessions in virtual worlds just don't work as well and don't have a lot of engagement. But COSEXA in particular has done a really nice job of recognizing what types of things could we really do in a virtual series that would be engaging and have people join us. And that includes topics that specifically needed extra training for some of their students and residents, one of which was thyroid cancer, which I was able to do and I'll be able to do again this year. The last couple of things I want to talk about include things like hybrid conferences done deliberately from low resource settings and kind of a low fidelity setup. So this was our work in Sierra Leone in March of 2024, where we were able to present from the ground there in the low resource setting at the West African College of Surgeons with very minimal technology, had about 70 attendees in the room and about 70 attendees online, all within the bandwidth of what was available to us there in Sierra Leone. So we were really happy to share some of our work there. And then the last thing we're working on within the Association for Academic Global Surgery is making things across surgical education and surgical research much more equitable. So I would be remiss if I didn't put in a plug for one of the journals that we work with, which is community-funded, open access, peer-reviewed publishing, and really helps us make things a lot more equitable for our partners in terms of research access. So those are sort of the things that I'm working on. And with that, I am going to stop sharing and stop talking. And I will turn it over to, I believe, Zuzana, who's going to talk next.
Actually, I can take it from here, Kristin. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And actually, it's quite amazing to see the impact you are having in global surgery and the work you are doing with many communities around the world. So it's amazing, quite amazing. So thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So now I'd like to welcome our second and third speakers. First, Zuzana Burivalova, who is an assistant professor and the principal investigator of the Sound Forest Lab. She's a tropical forest ecologist and a conservation scientist that is based at UW-Madison, and she's affiliated at the Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology, the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, and the Center for Sustainability and the Global Environment. She was a NatureNet postdoctoral research fellow at the Princeton University and the Nature Conservancy. Zuzana looks for ways to protect biodiversity in tropical forests, which are used by people and those set aside for conservation. She tries to answer tricky questions in tropical forest ecology using new technologies when traditional methods aren't good enough. She has worked in tropical forests in Madagascar, Papua New Guinea, Borneo, and Gabon. And Zuzana also has received several awards, In 2021, she was the winner of the National Award for Driving Global Impact. 2023, she received the Bassam Shakir Award. I hope I pronounced that okay. The Public Science Engagement Award, and 2023, the WINS Women of Discovery Award. So thank you, Zuzana, for joining us. And then I also like to take the time to welcome Caroline Zellmer. Carolina is a PhD scientist and leads early therapeutic development and strategy at the Foresite labs. Most recently, Caroline led 3 large industrial academic therapeutic development collaborations at the University of Cambridge, including one with GSK, where she also was a visiting scientist. And prior to Cambridge, Caroline was developed microbial therapeutics for malnutrition and diarrheal diseases, and led the first clinical trial for a microbial therapeutic in a low to a middle income country. During that time, Caroline also had joined positions as a research affiliate and a visit lecturer at MIT, and she began her career investigating emerging infectious diseases at the US NIH. Caroline has received her bachelor's degree with honors from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she studied microbiology, history of science, and global health. And she later completed graduate training at the Pasteur Institute, where she received her PhD from the University of Cambridge, where she developed novel therapeutics for drug-resistant pathogens. She also served as a board member of the Microbial Society, and she is also a very esteemed member of GHI's Board of Visitors. So welcome, and thank you for joining us, Caroline, as well. And now I'll turn it to Zuzana. So Zuzana, if you can please share with us your slides and your thoughts about women in science. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jorge, for the introduction, and thank you, Kristin, for an amazing talk. And I will take you all from very cool global surgery to rainforest health. But before we get to rainforest, I want to say I actually grew up in a temperate forest in the Czech Republic, which is not too different from the forest we have here in Wisconsin. But when I was small, one of my favorite toys was this pop-up rainforest book made by a Czech artist, Wojciech Kubaszta, in the 60s. This photo that my parents took of it a while ago does not do it justice at all, because when you played with this book, you were just transported into the rainforest. You could hear the parrots, the monkeys, you could smell the porcupine poop. It was the best thing ever. And I definitely think it was one of the reasons why I then eventually became a tropical forest conservation scientist. It wasn't a straightforward or simple path, and I'll be happy to talk about those details later on. But actually, I would say until about 30 days ago, I was going to say it is the best time ever to be a tropical forest conservation scientist. That might not be true right now, but still, many people still do understand the importance of forests and trees because of climate change. So forests worldwide store an enormous amount of carbon that helps us take the carbon away from the atmosphere and help mitigate climate change. And that's why over the last couple of years, there's been an increasing effort globally to plant more trees to restore degraded forests. So nowadays, even companies that have nothing to do with forests, like Netflix, United, your toothpaste company, they say, or they actually do sometimes, plant trees while you're brushing your teeth or you're traveling on an airplane. And that, I think, overall is great news. What I am sometimes worried about, though, is if the tree planting, if these forest conservation efforts look a little bit more like the picture on the left, which is a monoculture plantation of one tree species of rubber in Colombia, rather than the picture on the right, which is this amazing rainforest in Gabon. Whereas these monoculture plantations that you can see on the left actually do take the carbon in, they do absorb it, they grow really fast. So that's good, but they are an absolute disaster for biodiversity. So tropical forests around the world, they have probably more than half of all vertebrate animal species in them, which is just mind-boggling. And I'm not even talking about plant species. This plant species, Ophiocolea ratavasoni, is one of my favorites because I was involved in documenting it for the first time for Western Science. And this species that flowers from the tree trunk, which is just very unusual, lives on 36 kilometers square of forest. And if those 36 kilometers square are gone, for example, to establish a new monoculture plantation, this species will go extinct. And I think that would just be such a shame because it's such a beautiful flower. So why then these companies and also NGOs and also sometimes governments, why do then they plant these monoculture plantations when they're not that great for biodiversity? There are lots of different reasons, but one of the really important ones is that it's actually really hard to measure biodiversity. And what we cannot measure, we are very unlikely to actually take care of because we can't report how well are we doing. And that's why one of my goals is to investigate biodiversity more and come up with measurement tools. So right now I want to play you, what does it sound like in the middle of this beautiful rainforest in Gabon? Or maybe you took a guess what species this might be. And maybe you guessed correctly that it was this group of chimpanzees. Okay, so these kinds of chimpanzees, these kinds of species, we can see in the rainforest if we go down to the ground. And that's great. But there are lots of other species that we cannot see or they're really hard to see. And listening to the sounds of the rainforest might be much easier. So now I want you to maybe close your eyes and listen to this rainforest recording from a protected community forest in Indonesia. Okay, so that was probably you heard more species than just one primate. And this was during early morning in Indonesia, so these kind of noises wake you up. Now I would like you to listen to this next recording, which was taken the same time of the day and same time of the year, just a few tens of kilometers from this protected forest. So this probably sounds a little more boring, right? You can only hear a couple of crickets, maybe some small songbirds. And this was from the monoculture plantation of the species Acacia. So hopefully you can see or rather hear that these simple forests, simple plantations have much more boring biodiversity than pristine rainforest. And to be able to help companies and governments and NGOs document how much biodiversity they're conserving, we need to give them a tool that could measure this biodiversity cheaply and effectively. And that's been one of my biggest goals since I have joined the University of Wisconsin-Madison. That's the work I do with my lab, the Sound Forest Lab. Here are pictures of some of past and current lab members. So our mission is to do science that will be good for biodiversity, but also for people, so that people who live in these forests or close to these forests can benefit from them as well. Okay, so one of the major ways, as you have already probably guessed, is how we measure the health of rainforests is by documenting the sounds and soundscapes in these forests. But how can we turn that into insights? So first of all, we record the soundscapes in the forest. Here you can see our campsite in Gabon, close to a river, and on the right, I'm setting up some equipment in Peru. Well, usually, actually always, we work very closely with local collaborators or local communities or even para-ecologists from indigenous groups. Here are just a few of my recent collaborators, and they have all made my work so much more interesting because they're the ones that know the forest really well. They know exactly what's needed in terms of conservation, and they also know the species that make the sounds really well. Okay, so once we have these soundscapes, we analyze them, and I won't go into detail, but I just want to show you two quick ways to analyze soundscape data. So first, we can just tease out the individual species from the recording. So this is what a chimpanzee sound that you heard earlier looks like. And we can use artificial intelligence to help us with that. So we can get to, for example, lists of species from these intact forests, and we can start track which species are lost when the forests are becoming less healthy or degraded by people. But oftentimes, we don't actually know what all species there might be. So it's really tricky to use artificial intelligence to then recognize them. You can't teach a machine to identify something when you don't give it any training data. That's why we use this other approach where we summarize the whole soundscape in terms of its activity. And this is a really good approach to get kind of baseline indicators of rainforest health. So here on this graph, you can see this kind of baseline in green, where on the y-axis is soundscape saturation, which means how busy or how interesting the rainforest soundscape is during different times of the day. And then in blue, you can see fragmented forest, which is less healthy, has less biodiversity. And this way we can set up monitoring tools for different conservation projects so that they can compare themselves to these baselines. And one of the projects that I'm most proud of that I've been leading over the last couple of years is the Soundscape Baselines project, where we're trying to gather evidence on what is a normal, healthy rainforest sound like at the most intact forests around the world. We're recording soundscapes nonstop, 24 hours a day for a full year. And this is being done by local teams of scientists that live in or near the forests. We're using these soundscapes for science, but we're also using them to bring biodiversity, the animals that live in these forests, closer to people. So, for example, we're collaborating with illustrators to illustrate these beautiful soundscapes into images that people can connect with the soundscapes, and we make different outreach tools and just make art out of the science as well. So with that, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank my funders and collaborators, and I also want to thank the Women's Wings World Quest, which is my community of women explorers, scientists, and people in the arts. And I'll be happy to take questions later. I'll turn it back over to Jorge.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Zuzana. That's so wonderful. And it's incredible to hear those sounds of a healthy forest. Thank you so much for the research and the great work that you do. So now, lastly, we'll turn it to Caroline. She's going to give us a presentation about her views of women in science. Thank you, Caroline.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this. I'm gonna, first of all, thank you for having me, Jorge, and the GHI team. It's been really fun to be a part of this organization, especially because I got so much out of it as an undergrad. So it's really exciting to see how GHI has grown. I'm gonna tell a little bit of a different story because I'm based in industry instead of in an academic context like my fellow fabulous panelists. So I wanted to first start with this overview slide that really just shows that I didn't get here by myself and that I've been really fortunate to be a part of a huge number of really diverse culturally background, age, generational expertise area groups. And that's been the case for me across every context in which I've worked. And through those different communities, I think, I've been the real beneficiary as an individual of learning a huge amount from my colleagues and friends and teammates, but also our science has gone a lot farther, a lot faster because we've been able to work together across the spectrum of our worlds. And so these photos come from 5 different continents of collaboration. So all over the world, getting to work and learn alongside one another. And my focus, as Jorge mentioned in my background, which I'll get into a bit more, has really been around therapeutic development, specifically until really this current role I'm in now has been really focused on multi-drug resistant pathogens. But now I'm in a bit more of a broader context. But yeah, just wanted to really reiterate that I didn't get here on my own and that, I think as a woman in science, it's really powerful to find community amongst, your fellow peers, but also across the spectrum of the sciences. So obviously more biological sciences, but, some of my closest friends and compatriots in these different endeavors have been across the technical spectrum. So I really would encourage everyone listening who's a student to, or at any stage of their career really, to try and find those people who can help you even just talk through some of the things that we face as women in science, because we go together, together we go farther and faster. So yeah, just wanted to give that to set the tone. Oh, okay. So I'm not sure actually about my fellow panelists, but I grew up in Madison. So I'm a Madison native and was the daughter of entrepreneurs. So from a really young age, similar to being, I think, around scientists, as entrepreneurs, you're always thinking about how do we think differently? How do we change the status quo? Why should we accept the way that things are? What new knowledge and innovation can we generate? And I think as a scientist, it's very similar. So, really, my parents sometimes get angry when I say this, but, every day as a kid at the dinner table, thinking about, the problems that they were trying to solve, and them, really generously bringing us into those adult conversations from a young age, and it really instilled a huge sense of curiosity and wonder, which has really applied into my career and been quite beneficial for me, I think, in always just asking more questions, which I think is sort of the way entrepreneurs think as well. And scientists are very much, always questioning what's going on and doing more experimentation. So from a young age, really got to see that from the ground up. And growing up in Madison, I'm sure as many of you have taken advantage of, there's a huge community and public offering of scientific opportunities for the greater Madison area. And so, from a young age, really getting to participate in things like DNA extraction, which is what that photo is from. And then, a big part of also Wisconsin, I think, is that Wisconsin idea that Jorge touched on, which is that, whatever we're doing in Madison and in Wisconsin and in our network should really have far-reaching impact. And I have 3 of my grandparents grew up on farms. And so, really seeing the way that, the world is this hyper-connected thing, but things really do start in one place. And so seeing that as well, and the agricultural connections and the implications that network has really stayed with me and still is something I think about often. So for me, it was really the foundation was so much about curiosity and the connectivity of the world. So I also won the Lucky Neighbor lottery. I don't know if Kaylin is on here, but Kaylin also is a neighbor of my parents through random ways of life. But my childhood next door neighbor was the dean of research of the UW Pharmacy School. So I actually had the great privilege of working in his lab as a teenager and got to see, I'd bike around, but I got to see from a really early age just how amazing the Wisconsin research infrastructure is and just how much you can do in an incredible environment like UW. And so for me, it was really a no-brainer to start there and to go to Wisconsin as an undergrad. I think as an in-state student, we're so fortunate that we have this amazing land-grant university in our backyard with hugely talented experts like my fellow panelists. And so for me, it was really an easy choice to go to UW. And I ended up being so fortunate because I found amazing research mentors along the way. I had that curiosity from my parents as entrepreneurs, and then getting to work in Warren's lab in high school, I knew I really was interested in doing and taking advantage of the Wisconsin research infrastructure as an undergrad. And I actually spent so much time doing research. I worked in 4 different labs as an undergrad and was really fortunate because, as Jorge said, my background is in microbiology. I got to work with the first patients who got something called fecal transplants, which there's this really awful infection called C. difficile, and it's incredibly antibiotic resistant. And so there would be these patients who would go in the hospital for something else, acquire C. diff, and then, long story short, be in this terrible cycle of, flare of C. diff, try and go on antibiotics, it gets worse, and not really having any durable cure or treatment solution. And so these fecal transplants came along, which are really exactly as they sound. And I got to work with the first patients at Wisconsin who received those fecal transplants. This was back in 2014. And, within 24 hours, these microbial therapeutics really did the trick for a huge number of these patients. And these were individuals who had been so unwell with their C. diff that they had moved their bed into their bathroom. They had had such a debilitated quality of life. So at Wisconsin, it was the kind of place where as a 20-year-old, 19-year-old, you had the opportunity to work on something that was very forward thinking in the clinical development landscape. And through that, I really saw how exciting it was to change patient outcomes and change the trajectory of someone's health. And that made me really excited to try and think about how else I could do that beyond Wisconsin. So I ended up being a summer fellow at the NIH, and then after that, ended up going to the NIH for 1.5 years in Bethesda, where I worked with some of the leading people in the emerging infectious disease space and did novel pathogen characterization there, and felt really lucky to get to take advantage again of that incredible infrastructure and community, and just got incredible training from that community. Again, I don't know how many students are on this call, but I emailed my future NIH boss for 1 year trying to see if they would have space for me, because they didn't post positions like that. So I just have to say, if there's something that you're excited about, if there's a person that you want to work with, there's absolutely no issue with sending them, a cold email and just explaining who you are and your interests, because I think that experience for me has opened so many doors. And I truly emailed Tara Palmore for over 1.5 years to try and get that position, and eventually ended up there. And we have a New England Journal paper together. It was a very fruitful, productive time. So from there, I went to MIT and OpenBiome, and OpenBiome was an organization that, like those fecal transplants I was working with in my undergrad, they were trying to really take that on a global scale and think about how can we leverage modulation of the microbiome in order to shift health outcomes, specifically in diseases of high burden in low resource settings. And this was funded by the Gates Foundation. And so I was there for 3 years and set up the first clinical trials of microbial therapeutics in a low to middle income country. And so this is at the University of Cape Town, and also did a lot of work at KEMRI in Nairobi. And, really, again, getting to see how can we shift clinical outcomes in the best way possible, and do research on all of that, but also really accelerate what we're learning in the lab to clinical practice or into the clinical development pipeline. How do we try and shorten that, as they say in pharma, the valley of death between science, lab science, and then patient practice. So was super exciting to be a part of that, and also participated in a lot of work at MIT and was a visiting lecturer there, and really enjoyed getting to interact with some fantastic students there. Also during this period, I spent a good amount of time at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, which was a wonderful experience, so a highly international time. But yeah, and there's some really amazing scientists there as well. So I just have to say, this was really the beginning for me, a huge number of different institutions, and also finding great community in each of these contexts with scientists and team members from around the world who I'm still in touch with now. So from Boston and all of that work, I was really fortunate and made a great connection who ended up being my PhD supervisor at Cambridge. So I'm not sure how many individuals on this call are familiar, but there's a bit of a different PhD model in Europe, where you go in and you have a specific project, a specific advisor, and it's much shorter. You don't take classes. So you can do 3 years, you can do 4 years of your PhD, and it's just a project. no classes. So I was really interested in, again, continuing in my, therapeutic development journey and learning more in a very robust context. And so I was very lucky in getting to sort of create this triumvirate between myself, GSK, the pharmaceutical company, and Cambridge, and having this this great experience of getting to set up 3 different drug development collaborations, 2 of which were with GSK. And so I spent a lot of time on site with GSK in Italy and the UK, getting to basically develop new therapeutics for multi-drug resistant pathogens. So getting to see the other end of the spectrum, at the beginning, I had really focused on like the patient, and then with GSK really thinking about, okay, we're looking at the landscape. Where are the targets we should go after? What are the experiments we need to do for our IP package? How do we need to be thinking about these components so that when we do have our ideal drug candidate, we have all of that data that we need to have in order to file to then do that IND. Whereas before I was really at the other end, thinking about the evaluation of these drugs in patients in clinical trials. So it was a great training ground. Had a fantastic experience in the UK and Cambridge, and really interesting just environment. I mean, it's 800-year-old institution. You have a huge number of Nobel laureates, so really interesting time and place. And GSK, again, a huge pharmaceutical company, so very different from a small biotech, from the US government, from academic institutions. So really lucky to get to see all these different contexts of, how people think about science, how different teams work, and also what it means to be a woman in science in each of these countries and contexts. So now I actually ended up finding an organization that I didn't know anything about, and also a total space that I had no idea about when I was an undergrad, which is this venture capital world. And basically, it's totally different than what my fellow panelists do, in the sense that we have, this venture capital fund. They raise a certain amount of money, and my job is I work on the incubation of new biotech companies within the fund. So part of the fund does, traditional venture investing, which maybe you've heard about. But then my part really focuses on, okay, how do we spot those opportunities in the landscape of human health where there's a gap, where there's a company that should be doing something, but that doesn't exist. So we're going to make it. And so I work really closely with a small team, and this is some of them. And what we try and do is set up companies that we think should exist across the clinical development landscape, and create new therapeutics in those spaces. So this is really pulling on all of my past experiences from the NIH, from GSK, from MIT, from OpenBiome, from my undergrad at Wisconsin, where, really getting to see how do we put together all these different pieces so that we can make a drug compound that we feel good about evaluating in a clinical trial, and how do we put together the valuation of this space, the IP, the potential human impact, the competition and the landscape. So I'm doing something completely different than my fellow panelists, but it's really interesting, and I think a great training ground as well for whatever ends up coming beyond that. But yeah, so this is me, I'm Caroline, and again, these are the fabulous people who helped me get to where I am today, and thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to the questions.
Well, Caroline, thank you so much. That was an incredible story you told us, and I would say congratulations on such a journey. It's an amazing journey you have had, and it's quite fantastic. So I'll turn it to Kristin. Kristin, would you like to moderate the questions?
Of course, yeah, I'm happy to do that. So just a reminder for anybody who is listening and has questions for any of us here on the panel, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we will answer them. I wanted to start, I was actually inspired by listening to both of Zuzana and Caroline's talks, talking about mentorship and the people who have helped us get to where we are. One of the things that struck out to me in Zuzana's slide was the picture of the very homogeneous forest of all the single type of trees without any diversity. And I can't speak for everyone, but I can certainly speak for myself that it's been very, very helpful for me to have mentors that are both within the surgical field, but also that are not, and even some that are not even clinical or not even in healthcare. And so the people that have, I think, supported me and given me some of the best wisdom have been the people that are not directly related to the work that I am doing. So I would first ask my 2 co-panelists if you have any examples of mentors that have done that for you, and what advice you would give to particularly younger people looking to follow in similar pathways.
I can go first. Yeah, absolutely. I think, I have a huge number of mentors who don't have anything to do with my area of science, and some of them are in finance, which has actually been really useful. Sort of moving through different sectors where maybe there's less representation of women, and it's, much more, I think behind on that change to be more reflective of the general population. So yeah, I think it's also, there's, at least I'm based in Boston, there's different great opportunities here to meet women across industry. They have some really nice networking events. So yeah, I think Kristin, to your point, some of my best mentors have actually been outside of science too. I don't know about Zuzana.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I agree that having those insights from outside of our disciplines can definitely be helpful, especially in moments of doubt or change or transition. I've been really lucky to have a mentor who is a journalist. He has his own environmental journalism website, and that has been really useful because it helped me see, okay, how does my work, and sometimes in academia, we can get sucked into these silos that Kristin was displaying on the picture. How does my work kind of relate to the broader world? How much impact is it having? Could it have more impact? So yes, I agree that it's important to try to have mentors outside of the discipline. That said, I would also say that at earlier points in studies or in a career, it can be really hard to find mentors if you don't know how to find them, if you're not kind of like in that community. It can be hard and can be intimidating. And so I know a lot of, for example, undergraduate students don't know how to reach out, and I think it can be one way around it can be to attend conferences, attend talks, and just talk to the person that you're interested in potentially mentoring you, and just try a small discussion. You don't have to go into these interactions thinking, oh, this will be my next mentor, because that can be too intimidating and too much.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I always give the example of one of my mentors in the world of global surgery. I happen to have a reason. She's based at Stanford, and I happen to have a reason to be at Stanford for another conference for a grant that I was involved in, and simply had not worked with her, knew who she was. She's very well known in the field, and just cold emailed and said, "I'm going to be at Stanford, and I have a free afternoon. Could I take you to coffee and just pick your brain?" And it goes with the attitude that the worst somebody can say is no. And instead of that, she responded and said, "Sure, I'll pick you up." And it was the beginning of what's been now probably close to a decade of her mentoring me both closely and from afar. So I think that it's always worth, just talking to people. We're all just people in this field, and everyone is generally surprisingly approachable. So I think that's, a wonderful way to remind people. And I think one of the things we can do is put, if Katie doesn't mind putting in the chat, there are definitely a couple of resources that GHI has or that UW has that can help you kind of find a network and support your work. And I'm wondering if you guys, both Zuzana and Caroline, can tell me if there's any particular resources or organizations that you have found to be incredibly helpful as you build that network of mentors.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it also in my my short presentation as well, but I think, to what both of you just said, the cold emailing and cold contact actually has been so fruitful. And I think I'm sure everyone now has a LinkedIn, but I think honestly, the best resource for me has been filtering LinkedIn by Wisconsin, or now by Cambridge, because you can end up seeing who went to Wisconsin. And I think that that's actually been a really nice bridge for like a warm intro with a lot of and people who've become mentors for me. But I also think there's some really great societies. So like for microbiology, there's the ASM, there's the British version, which is Microbiology Society. I think there's been great opportunities there. And I'm sure GHI also has a big presence at ASTMH, which is a big global health conference as well, more on the infectious disease side. So I would suggest, like now a huge number of attendee lists for conferences are also available online. And then also if anyone's in modeling, Midas is really good. They do infectious disease modeling stuff, and they have great networking. So.
And I put in the chat a link for Wings Women of Discovery, which is a great community of women explorers. And even if you just want to be inspired and see, who's a great polar photographer or someone who's discovered a new way orangutans use plants to cure themselves of diseases. Go on that website, and they even have card decks of women explorers, which are amazing resource for maybe children or younger students. So I really like that community.
I think that's incredible. Those are all really, really great resources. I think the last question I'm going to pose, again, please, anybody listening, feel free to put things in the chat for us. But the last question that I'm going to pose is, we've talked a lot about like the great work and the successes that we've had, but the road is never as smooth or as straightforward, I think, as sometimes it seems when you're, especially early on, starting off in your career. So I wonder if people would be willing to share examples of challenges, or even maybe something that was categorically a failure in your experience in moving along in this work in the world of science.
Okay. Yeah, I have one. So my mentor in my undergrad research, I don't think she's on this call, but her name's Nasia Safdar. And she's like a big infectious disease person at Wisconsin. And she's an MD PhD scientist. And I totally wanted to do what she had done. I wanted to be an MD PhD, and I had gone to the NIH, and I had all these, amazing experiences. But I didn't get in where I wanted to go for MD PhD. I got rejected, I think, from most places, and I had applied for that. And, you go to the NIH, and a lot of people will be there for a year or two and then go to medical school. And so basically I was at this crossroads where I, had to say to myself, okay, do I try and apply again and get in somewhere that I want to go? Do I go to this place I'm not excited about? Like getting rejected from all these schools is never a good feeling. But actually in the end, like, it was a great thing because I ended up on this path that's way more interesting for me and a better fit for my interests. But it was like a huge rejection and failure because I'd been working towards, you take the MCAT, you do all the classes, like, you put yourself in the position to do that kind of program. And in the end, have to really say to yourself, okay, what do I do if I've been rejected from this path? And in the end, it was better. So yeah, just be patient with yourself, and life is long, and you'll end up somewhere better. But yeah, that was a categorical failure for me, I would say. I don't know about Zuzana, if you have something you'd add.
Oh, I have many. I have many failures. And I actually quite like them because usually they lead to something better. I mean, one of the prominent ones was that the very first publication, my first PhD chapter, I had submitted 9 times in a row, and 9 times it got rejected, one after another. And I kept telling myself, okay, if it gets rejected the 10th time, this means something. This means maybe I should not continue in academia. But I think at the end of the day, it did make my paper better. That's one thing. And it also actually made me reflect really deeply on what would I do if I don't go into academia? And that would have been going into the conservation applied world, like working with an NGO. And actually that knowledge about myself made it very clear to me how I want to structure my academic career, that I really want to be in very close partnerships with NGOs because the application of my science matters to me so much. So I think I don't know if I would have reflected as much on this at that early in my PhD if it wasn't for all of these rejections, which were, of course, absolutely horrible and nerve-wracking. Will it ever get accepted? And sometimes it's hard to see the good things on failures and rejections. And there's so many in academia, and I'm sure people are facing extra challenges right now with various opportunities just being gone. And so that's when I think it's really important to go to friends, communities, colleagues, and just, get through it that way.
I think that's very insightful. I'll share that, similarly, when I started both medical school and ultimately surgical residency, I had intents of doing a completely different specialty each time. And by the time I had settled on surgery, I was planning a different surgical specialty than what I do. And I actually started on that rotation my first month of internship and worked as hard as I thought a human being could possibly work, and then was sat down 1 month into it and told that I had been a huge disappointment thus far. And was not what they expected. And that was a little harsh. I think that was an overly aggressive feedback and failure, but it prompted me to figure out how I could get better and what I could do that really allowed me to grow and change and become a better resident, a better surgeon, and ultimately changed even the specialty that I wanted to go into. So I think it's, experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted. And ultimately that leads you to a much better path down the road. And so on that somewhat optimistic note, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Jorge for the last couple of minutes and wrap up unless anyone has additional questions.
Wow, such a wonderful discussion, and really, I just find amazing, all three of you, the great work and the great discussion that we had today. So I want to thank Kristin, you for moderating the session today, and also our panelists, Zuzana and Caroline. What a wonderful work that you have done, and I really admire your persistence and your desire to, go ahead and do the great work that you do. So thank you so much. I appreciate what you have done, and I think this is really important for to improve the field for future generations and women that I think we should have more women in science. So thank you so much for the great discussion. And so just to end, I'd like to hopefully ask you to join us for our next Global Health webinar on Tuesday, March 11, and this will be at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. And we actually will be talking about how you connect global health and impact storytelling. So there will be something very unique, something a little different. So thank you so much. And please be sure to visit our website, ghi.wisc.edu, to learn more about all the different activities that are going on in global health here at the University of Wisconsin, but also you can visit today's archive video. And once again, thank you, Kristin, Zuzana, and thank you, Caroline, for the great work. And also thank you for all the folks that joined the webinar today. Thank you so much. I will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.